We need to cover now the unfolding crisis in Syria, Webster.
You're right. This has a number of contributing points, but we should, first of all, obviously go back to the last couple of days. The Russian government claimed on Friday that they had killed the caliph of ISIS, in other words, the caliph of the caliphate of the Islamic State, al-Baghdadi. And you remember this guy. He was the one who appeared with the Rolex watch in one of his first speeches. Now, he is supposedly operating in the city of Raqqa. Raqqa is the ISIS capital. It's the only city that they retain of any size, right? You remember Aleppo was taken by the Russian-backed Syrian army with some help from some other militias, Iranians, Hezbollah from Lebanon. That was Aleppo. And then the question of Mosul. Mosul is now largely subdued. Resistance by ISIS there has largely ended. And that was done by the Iraqi army, backed up by certain militias, but with United States support and United States air cover. What we've got now is the last phase of the surrounding encirclement of Raqqa and fighting already inside the city of Raqqa. So that is being done by the Kurds, essentially, calling themselves as part of a coalition of Syrian democratic forces. And this is largely to prevent the Turks from going wild on the subject, right? So it's clearly not just the Kurds, but something broader than the Kurds. The SDF is already penetrating heavily into Raqqa, into the suburbs, and the city is now pretty much surrounded. The Russian claim on Friday was that there was a meeting of the top ISIS leadership in some kind of a arena or auditorium in Raqqa, and that the Russian Air Force successfully bombed it, and that they killed the caliph al-Baghdadi, as well as about 30 of the top commanders of ISIS, as well as about 300 fighters. This is unconfirmed. It's unfortunate, but we may not know this for quite a while. There have been repeated reports over the past several months or year or more about the death of Baghdadi. Right? Reports of Baghdadi's death have always turned out to be exaggerated. He has been, he's kept going somehow. He may have been wounded at one point, but that's even that is uncertain. So the Russians have made this claim, and it's not certain. I'm not sure we want to say if the Russians have succeeded in doing what they say, killing Baghdadi, killing the 30 leaders and the 300 fighters. Well, congratulations to the Russian Defense Ministry and the Russian forces on the ground, because that's a contribution to the struggle for human civilization, right? Which is what Putin likes to portray himself as, the great reliable ally in the fight against terrorism. And to some extent he is, but not perhaps as completely as he said. For example, he tried to suggest in the Oliver Stone interviews that he was, against terrorism everywhere. What we've always found is that the Russian side was concerned with protecting the Syrian army, perfectly legitimate, protecting the Hezbollah, protecting the Iranian militias fighting under their aegis, but had not done particularly well in fighting ISIS. And therefore, there was this doubt, right? They're attacking the people that are close to them, threaten them immediately. But on the ISIS side, this was not so clear, and it remains not so clear. For example, if the world concludes that al-Baghdadi is dead, that's sort of a good cover story for al-Baghdadi, going to South America or something like this. In other words, if the word is out that you're dead, it's a whole lot easier to escape from situations like this. And that might even apply to some of these 30 ISIS fighters. So without imputing motivation to anybody, you really have to be sure about these things before you conclude it. Now, the incident happening in the last 24 hours was that a group of Kurds, and again, Kurds in terms of the actors on stage, right? The Kurds are the most sympathetic of all of them, right? And especially their women's battalions, right? Because these are people who are sort of leftist, they're progressive, they're not benighted, they're not obscurantist, and they want to have their own national state. And it seems to me they may have gone very far towards winning the right to have it. But the other powers, especially Turkey, don't want this to happen. So the Kurdish forces, SDF, Syrian Democratic Forces, are approaching Raqqa, beginning to attack Raqqa. And the claim is made then from the U.S. side that a Syrian Air Force plane comes along and starts bombing these Kurdish forces. Now, this is not legit. If true, this is a bad thing to do, right? Because you're providing air support for ISIS and you're killing these Kurds who are, again, if there are any good guys, it's the Kurds, right? And if anybody's done yeoman service against terrorism, they're really the ones who have fought terrorism. But we don't know. Is it true? Is it a pretext? And naturally, anytime you have a chain of command that contains people like Mattis, I'm sorry, I can't trust him, and above all, Trump, we don't know what the story is. So that means this entire thing has a huge question mark over it, along with the other one about Baghdadi. So the Syrian plane is there. Apparently, the U.S. forces used the deconflicting hotline. There's a deconflicting hotline which goes from an Air Force base. Here we go. The Al-Udeid Air Force Base in Qatar is one end of the deconflicting hotline because that's where it is from there that the U.S. airstrikes into Syria are largely flown, the ones that are from ground-based aircraft. And that goes to a Russian military base, I think in the southern part of the Russian Federation. So there was a certain amount of traffic about this deconflicting stuff going on. And then at a certain point, the Russians say the U.S. never said we're now going to shoot down this plane because you have ignored all of our warnings up to now. But we don't know. This is all hearsay, right? We don't have the transcripts, and short of that, we really don't know. So this hotline was in use yesterday, and the Syrian aircraft were shot down. Now, the Russian Ministry of Defense has, of course, responded. They've taken rather violent exception to this, that this is unacceptable to them. But then what they've gone on to say is that any U.S. aircraft flying west of the Euphrates, now think about it, the two rivers of the Fertile Crescent, right? E.T., Euphrates, Tigris. Euphrates is the one that goes through the corridor there, right? In other words, it starts up in Turkey and it flows across into Syria, right? And then we have that the long-term Efren corridor, which is now presumably no longer operative. Anyway, anything west of the Euphrates, the Russian Defense Ministry says, will be tracked by their radar as a target. Now, notice that does not say they will destroy and shoot down anything west of the Euphrates. It doesn't even say that they will attempt to do that. It simply says, we're going to track you with radar and other means as a target. Now, that's generally lighting it up. Lighting up a target means you point the radar at it, you make those people understand that they could become a target, and then the idea is they should take the hint and go away. Needless to say, any shooting down of an American plane by the Russians would lead to a diplomatic scandal of vast proportions. I would rather not see this happen. I think this would be a very bad thing, precisely because